And what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. I'm Andrew. Over there's Connor. This week, Leagues Cup is finally done. It's wrapped up. The Columbus Crew has taken down LAFC once again for another piece of silverware in the cabinet. And we wanted to sit down one last time, not so much to recap it. I think enough people have recapped this tournament, but I think it's important to chat about its future because while it is here to stay, that doesn't mean that it has to be forced to stay as it is, be it format, dates, gameplay. There are ways that this tournament can be made better, and we're going to cover as much of that as we can today. Whether it be realistic, whether it be super hopeful inside of the scope of what the tournament is meant to be, we're going to try and cover as much as we can. So be sure to leave your thoughts on this on our suggestions below. Give us a follow, send a message. We got a new messaging thing at the top of this audio. Uh, Little send us a message there, and then get involved. I figure we get all that out in the beginning so that when people are listening, bang, right there, there you go. So, Connor, what do you think about that? Is that a good new intro?
Oh yeah, great. Like let's get more messages of people getting angry at us. That's what we need. Another
Yeah, well,
platform for people to rage at us.
well, it was cool because Buzzsprout has this new thing where you if you go on to the episode, it basically comes in and says, send us a message here, and it's like a text message, but it goes into our little area that says fan mail on the website, and it's empty right now. So I want people to send us fan mail because I think that'd be really fun. Anyways, we're here. Make sure you interact with us, give us a follow, share with your friends, share with people you don't like. I don't care because we are going to cover today Leagues Cup changes. How can we make this tournament better for everybody involved to increase its traction, or do we change it so that it has a different, more meaningful role? Spoiler for later. But nobody really needs a spoiler for this one. We're going into Scar for the week. Connor, what are you rocking?
Well, we're rocking the same thing because we're talking about Leagues Cup, so we're talking about Leagues Cup champions, and that would be the Columbus Crew. Even though this is the wrong championship, I'll just cover this part. 20 something champions.
What?
Woo! And
And
so
then cover
cover
the
this
MLS
part,
Cup.
cover the
Yeah.
cup.
And then you got to cover the logo because it's not the right logo, right? Kind of a whole
Whatever.
nightmare of a
Close
scarf.
enough. It's just a mess.
See, I thought the Crew were so good in this last run of 18 months or so that I actually went out and got a scarf made with the front three of Rossi, Cucho, Ramirez.
Yeah, sure you did, but yeah,
There you
sure
go.
you did.
Bang, look at that.
Yeah, you want to talk about the wrong logo? You're like 20 years behind.
The three workmen of the Crew. I'm really upset, man. My paycheck came in and I had a choice between whether to buy approximately 437 scarves or put it into a savings account for the future. And I had to be an adult and put it in a savings account.
See,
Life's not fair. Don't get
had
old, people.
if you had stuck with the accounting path, you'd understand that if you put your money in now and save it, you could buy more scarves, exponentially more scarves in the future.
Yeah, but what's the
When we're
future if you're not living
but
well in the present?
when we're up to 80 teams in the future, you're gonna need all that money to buy all those scarves.
Oh man, I that's really what I want. I want to take one like I don't know if my company does like bonus or anything, but if I get like a bonus for Christmas or whatever, I'm going to just finish out and get a scarf from every team, and then that'll be it until until more teams join, I guess.
This man's never gonna retire because he's gonna have 800 scarves.
Listen, what's the point of working if you're not going to use money to get it what you want now, right?
Yeah, that was you couldn't have put that more eloquently.
Listen, I am engineer. I do numbers good. I don't do words.
It's fair enough. That's the same thing for me. I am accountant.
Uh,
I do numbers good.
yeah, I press button into spreadsheet. Yay.
Yeah, pretty much. Spreadsheet
It's
do work for me.
it's already got conditional cells to tell you good or bad.
Yeah, I can't even figure it out myself.
Wow, what a start to the episode. All right, if you're still here, if you haven't clicked off yet, or if you skipped past this point in our time-stamped episode part, we are going to start chatting about Leagues Cup changes and what we can do to make this better. And I think there are a couple easy, low-hanging fruit ones, a couple of ones that are a little bit different, a little tougher to implement, and some that are way out there. I've got one of each. Connor, I think you showed up with negative, so I think it balances out to us having nothing. That was a good episode. Well done. We'll see everybody next week. Right. But I'll
Perfect.
start.
What an episode. We just talked about accounting and engineering and we're done.
I'll start off with the really easy one. I'm sure you've got this as well. Games in both countries, right? This is really easy. Everybody talks about it. Get it out of the way early. It does a really good job, this tournament, of dispatching this notion that has been given to us from the Champions League or Champions Cup, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to call it the league, where it was like, oh, Liga MX is clear of MLS because they always win Champions League, even though MLS is like one game into their season, right? Well, now we reverse the roles and we see, okay, MLS is pretty solid against teams, not in their regular season run, right? No teams from League MX made it even to the semifinals this year. With that being said, the thing that CCC or CCL does that Leagues Cup doesn't is that it has home and away matches for each side, except for the final for whatever reason. I guess they don't want the crew to, have a chance to poison, I guess, their opponent's back. I don't know. But I don't think Leagues Cup is ever going to have this status of like an elite tournament in the world, and people are going to look at it as important as the Champions League or whatever. But if you want to use this for a lot of prize money and for qualification spots in the Champions Cup, Champions League, it should be a bit more balanced in its schedule. So, and I think we laughed about this when we were doing our preview, right? That one of the groups had a Liga MX side that went from Mexico to Orlando, then up to Canada in like a 4-day span before going home. And they might have actually gotten out of the group and moved on, and gone somewhere else after that. That sort of stuff needs to be balanced out a little bit better than it is right now. And again, giving hub privileges to the top teams is a good start from Liga MX, but it definitely can be made better. And you can do this in a couple different ways by rotating the hosts every year, for example, is something that keeps being popped up there, right? Give Mexico a chance to host every other year, rather. I think it's an easy, low-hanging fruit one because it's really, it's a fair complaint, right? If you're going to go ahead and say, oh, we're the best of the best, right? You need to have it in the middle of both team seasons and you need to have it home and away, right? That's why I don't think anybody's going to be able to use Champions Cup or Leagues Cup to determine which is the better of the group. For me, this is a really low chance of happening, and that's because of the way that this tournament is structured and why it's structured the way it is. This tournament's a lot of fun. I know we both have enjoyed it. I know a lot of people have enjoyed it. But the main idea of it, and it's they don't hide it, it's to make money for both federations and attract new fans, right? MLS is trying to hit on their Liga MX fans in its own backyard. The Mexican Federation is trying to make money to stabilize itself. I mean, they canceled ProRel 4 or 5 years ago because teams stopped making money and they kept losing teams and basically about to fold, right? This is a good tournament that brings in a lot of money every year for both sides. Now, and I don't know the exact split of it, but it's quite clear that it makes a lot of money. I don't think that this is going to go anywhere, as unfortunate as it is, because there are more Liga MX fans in America that don't get to see their teams play, who will go out and shell out money to go watch their teams play in this sort of competition, than there are MLS fans in Mexico who are going to. I mean, that I don't know how many of those actually exist, right? And that is going to be kind of an overarching theme for me, where a lot of these ideas are clever in what the sporting aspect is meant to be, but because the tournament really is to help stabilize both federations and grow a little bit, I don't think it's gonna I don't think it's gonna change much.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those where I agree with you that I think it's unrealistic that it's going to happen, but it's not unrealistic in the fact that it would just take like a ton of work to get it done. And I understand that there are a lot of logistics to it. There's a lot more to the travel than just going from like Orlando to Nashville versus like going to a whole separate country in terms of
Mhm.
having to deal with that. But I do think it's one of the complaints that people have that I do feel like is the most one of the more reasonable ones that could be done if they wanted to do
Mhm.
it. It's not like, oh, we have to shift around the entire schedule of like both seasons and the tournament to make this change work. But it's like if you could just find a way to get a couple games in Mexico, now all of a sudden you're talking about some more balance between teams having to travel. Whereas right now, all League MX teams have to travel. And I'm glad they were able to get some games where it's like home games for them where they got to play a bit closer to Mexico. But still, I mean, obviously that's still a far cry from being in Mexico. I mean, granted, if you looked at the stands of a couple of those games where Liga MX teams were playing, it might as well have been a home game because they absolutely showed out for a lot of games. I think back to the San Jose, I think Chivas game, which shattered records, and I I can't imagine that shattered records because of the San Jose Earthquakes, the way they've been playing this season.
Well, the Quakes haven't had terrible turnout, but yes, that is
Yeah, but they're not all of a sudden shattering records because they're playing G-Bus.
no,
It's
no.
because
And
of
the thing for me is I didn't even include this idea of like the top 8 teams from each area host, and then you build around them because that's the logistical nightmare, right? Like, okay, how do we do that? And then who gets the quarterfinals, who gets the round of 16, who gets the semis, who gets it? That's the logistical nightmare. I don't see it ever happening. But doing a full flip and saying, okay, this is League MX's year, this is MLS's year, that I don't think is terribly difficult to do so long as League MX's infrastructure is able to handle that, which I think it should be. But yeah, because of what this is supposed to be, I don't see it happening.
I don't think they should do full like flips on who hosts because MLS has obviously way more teams than Liga MX does. So you're going to get situations where two MLS teams are playing often, and playing those games in Mexico makes zero sense because to your point before, there are a lot of Liga MX fans in the US. I don't think it's the case vice versa. I don't think you're going to find a lot of MLS fans in Mexico. So to play two MLS teams in Mexico, I think is going to be poor turnout and people just not really caring for the games. So I don't think we should do as much as it is a logistical nightmare to kind of balance between both countries and trying to appease all the fans on who plays where. I don't think switching games to fully being done in Mexico makes sense either.
Well, you still have those turnouts as well. I mean, you remember the Mazatlan versus might have been Juarez in the first edition of this thing where they played in Austin and it had like 200 fans show up. Like that's the same thing you would get there. So I think on both sides of it, you're going to have those issues. Now it'll be more prevalent with the flip of what it is now, right? Like as you mentioned, there are more
A lot more
MLS
prevalent.
versus MLS.
I think there were only like what, two groups that had two Liga MX teams in it,
Yes, yeah,
and then there
absolutely.
was like eight with two MLS teams in it. So it's like
Yeah.
it would be
Well,
way more often than just one game of, I mean, Juarez versus Mazatlan, which let's be honest is like even for Liga MX standards, that's pretty bottom of the barrel.
yeah, yeah, and I don't disagree with you. I'm just sounding it out here because it would make sense again. So there are two ways you have to look at this. It's from the sporting side of it versus the monetary side of it. What's better for both ends, right? If you are, and this is why I mentioned it, because if you're going to make this to qualify for the Champions League, it needs to have a little bit more balance, in my opinion, right? That's like almost saying every game is going to be played in Minnesota for qualification for whatever. I don't know. That was a bad example, but you know what I mean. Like it feels like you're tipping the scale a little bit, which isn't ideal, right? That being said, what's the true point of this? I don't necessarily see it as a secondary kind of competition to qualify. People are complaining like, oh, it's a money grab, it's a money grab. If you took away the Champions Cup spots, I'd still enjoy this competition. Right. I think it's fun. I think it's enjoyable. And that's what everybody's like, oh, you can't do this because it's just a money grab and you're tipping the scale to Champions Cup spots and all. Yeah, like it's definitely not structured properly for that. That doesn't mean it's not fun. Right. So you could take away those Champions Cup spots. I've got no problem with it. I think it's still a fun thing to do. If it was built, I almost think that if it was built to say, hey, we're doing this so that, and again, transparency, right? We're doing this so that both federations can have a little bit more money coming in and they can have this access to new fans and all this stuff. And it's just going to be a little, side quest almost. I'd still enjoy it, right? But I also don't really care either way because Champions Cup again doesn't have the same level of importance. We've been through that too. But yeah, I don't really see this happening, but we'll see because a couple things are starting to change here in a little bit. But I do want to ask you if you have anything different from that.
No, I mean, I don't really have a problem with it kind of giving a Champions League spot because, I mean, let's be honest, the scales are already tipped by the fact that only two leagues in all of North America get to compete in this competition. It's not kind of open to whatever leagues. It's not like the US Open Cup where there's 4 or 5 leagues competing and then, there's different equivalents to that in each country, like the Canadian Championship. I mean, it's the same thing. It's kind of the same thing in England. I mean, if you win the Carabao Cup, if you win the FA Cup, you get a European spot. So I think it's going to be the same thing here. I mean, to be honest, Liga MX and MLS sides are the strongest teams. And so it's not surprising to see them kind of have a shot at another Champions League spot because, I mean, you're getting more of the better teams in the competition then. I definitely think there is an argument for it being more, I guess, favored towards MLS by having all these MLS home games. But obviously, we talked about how that may not be super easy to kind of rectify that.
Yeah. What you got? What else you got?
Yeah, so one of the other things that I was thinking about to improve Leagues Cup was, and I'm not sure that all teams do this, so maybe you can correct me if I am wrong and you know that
I
all
love
teams do
doing
this,
that.
but finding a way to incorporate Leagues Cup tickets into the season ticket package at the beginning of the season because I think having to pay for season tickets and then pay extra on top of that for Leagues Cup games, people just aren't going to pay the extra money for Leagues Cup games. And I think you saw that to some extent where you had a lot of poor attendances in stadiums that normally don't have that. Like obviously Atlanta is a major example of that, where I mean, flashback to a couple of years ago, they were constantly breaking attendance records, and now you're seeing completely empty stadiums for the Leagues Cup. And I know there's probably a little bit of other factors going into that as well, but still, I think if you can kind of bake it into the season ticket package, where if you have season tickets, you get tickets for the Leagues Cup, and you don't have to pay extra for it. People will show up for it then. It at least from what I think. I mean, obviously there's people that are boycotting, but I don't think there's enough people boycotting that you should be seeing stadiums as empty as they have been.
The group stage of the Leagues Cup is included in most season ticket packages. Not all of them, but most of them. MLS season tickets that included Leagues Cup group stage versus non. The ones that did not were Inter Miami, Montreal, Nashville, LAFC, STL, and Minnesota. Some of them were just one group stage match. Some of them were all, however many they were hosting, whatever it may be. But for the majority of teams, they were included, and then most of them were turned down.
All right, well then,
I can build off of that a little bit, where not necessarily the inclusion of the tickets, but something that makes it known a little bit earlier. How do I phrase it? Kind of like promoting it a lot more readily and sooner, where the issue one of the issues that we ran into was games being booked 3 days in advance and not knowing whether you're going to have tickets or how much you're going to cost, and then also charging with like normal ticket prices for that. It kind of put people off trying to go. One of the things that they can do, one is promote it at a relatively high level, and then also mix in with that a little bit of a cheaper prices, especially for season ticket holders, season ticket members, and then utilizing maybe giveaway. Red Bull has been doing a lot of giveaway days, right? Maybe utilizing giveaway days on Leagues Cup days so that you can go out and say, here is something you can do to increase your likelihood to go there just to get the numbers up, right? Stuff like that, being more proactive about it. Now, what you might be able to do is say, okay, I had this conversation with, oh, I can't remember who I had this conversation with. It might have been MLS Gone Wild, I think, where what you'll want to do is go ahead and say, hey, these tickets are we're going to give you a discounted 60% off these tickets, right? Whatever the number is, pick a random number. And you're going to, you purchase in advance tickets to go to every single game, the possible two home games in the group stage, and then every single one after that, right? If we don't get that home game, if we don't move out of the group, if we don't get to a certain level, those are either going back to you in the form of monetary reimbursement, whether it be 80% or 100%, whatever it may be, or we'll give you credit to our merch shop. You go out, you buy scarves and kits and whatever. So you've already paid it. Instead of having to pay extra to get something that you would have wanted at the team store, bang, here you go. If you drop $300 for it, right? Okay, well, here's $300 to the store. Go buy yourself and family, friends, whatever, something nice, right? So it's almost like using the money to have a placeholder to go to these games and know, okay, it's in my schedule, it's in my season tickets things. That way I know I can sell them on if I'm not going to make it or whatever. Or okay, I've pretty much just put money in to get merchandise. Great. Now I'm at the game for the last game of the season. I know I have this credit. I might as well go get something anyway. Now that both sides win, right? Again, how realistic is that? I think that's probably of all of the ideas that we have here today, that might be the most realistic because it will increase attendance numbers, which is something that Don Garber's really focused on, obviously, as we spoke about in one of our other episodes. And it helps out the fans too because they know in advance instead and not 3 days in advance, more like 3 months in advance. Okay, these are the dates we have to look for.
So I did remember the other idea that I thought of, and I guess it could kind of go hand in hand with the ticket discussion because once you mentioned it, I do remember seeing a lot of stuff about, oh, there was only like 3 days notice that we were gonna play this game, which I get is like a extremely quick turnaround. Like obviously people make plans already like 3 days out, so it's tough to move things around to be like, oh, we have to go to this game. And I think this is one of those, if we're going to talk about like how realistic are these suggestions, I think this is one of those that's probably a bit unrealistic at this moment. It would be very hard to do. But if you could do it, I think it would kind of solve a couple of issues. And that would be trying to work the tournament scheduling into the season a bit more, as opposed to just putting this whole hiatus on the season. And this is, I would assume something along those lines is probably in your notes because I know it's a big talking point for a lot of people on having this huge pause in the season just to do this tournament. Whereas you look at England, for example, they're another. I think in this case they're a good example of scheduling because they have a full season plus two cup games in the middle on top of Europe and all that other stuff. So it's possible to get these games in there without having to pause the season. It's not like they're playing the Carabao Cup and completely pausing the Premier League season. And so if you could find a way to kind of get these Leagues Cup games maybe midweek, obviously it's a lot easier in England because what the furthest you have to travel is like 3 or 4 hours versus like games between Mexico and the US where you got to travel potentially like 6, 7 hours by plane. So it's obviously this is why I say it's one of the more unrealistic ones here. It's very hard to figure out, but if you could do that, I think you could space the games out more because right now you have to have these like 3 day like turnarounds because you can't just leave the season paused for like 2 or 3 months. That's just way too long. So you got to like have these quick turnarounds into like, okay, we won the quarterfinals, semifinals is going to be in like 3 days. But then it's like, all right, well, I have stuff planned for 3 days because I didn't know if there was going to be another LAFC game, for example. So now I'm not going to be able to go to the match. Whereas maybe if I had a week's heads up, I can make it work and I can go to the match. And if you can kind of incorporate it into the season, you don't have to worry about pauses and having longer times between games. So you could play a midweek Tuesday, Wednesday game in Leagues Cup, have your regular season games on the weekend, and then play the next round the next week. So you have more time to get fans to market it, to get fans to show up, to give them time to figure out things so they can show up. But again, I think it would solve the problem of like having the whole season on hiatus and pausing it, and could solve the ticket issue. But again, I do think it's unrealistic and would be very hard to do. And I'm not sure that I have the answer right now on what would be the best path forward on like trying to merge the schedules together.
While I agree with you that I think that is that's the definition of a stretch, I do have something a little bit to work on that. So it kind of works with the way that the thing is set up. So now I'm going to go into, I guess, my something I can see. This is the one that I think of my three is most likely to happen, and it's changing this three-team group format, right? So three teams in one group is just a really bad format. It leaves way too much up to chance, and it doesn't really do a lot of good for you. I think that the reason they did three teams is because of the numbers in the league. Right now, 47 teams, right? 29 here, 18 down there. So that's not easy to make a tournament competition out of, right? So you take two teams, bang, here you go. There's you have two teams that are gonna have a bye into the next round. Now here's your three, 15 groups of three, okay, right? And run with it, right? There's no real, I mean, you could do nine groups of five, but even then that gets kind of dicey. It's not easy to do. It also increases the number of games for Apple TV to say, here you go. But next year, the number goes to 48 with San Diego joining, which is a lot easier to work with. So if I'm in charge, what I'm doing is I'm saying goodbye three teams, goodbye two teams getting a bye into the first round. I go, and I'll tell you, I did two different ways. I either go 12 groups of four or eight groups of six, and I've set it up as right now I've done 12 groups of four because it was easiest to explain through. But this balances out a little more, and it allows you to work with better geography and limit travel. You have six teams in the West, six groups in the West, six groups in the East, and from there, the top team in each group. Let's say the top four from the West, the top four from the East, and then the winner and the runner-up of the Clausura, the winner and the runner-up of the Apertura, they all get hosting privileges. Right now, if the season ended today, Miami, Cincinnati, Columbus, RBNY, LA Galaxy, LAFC, Salt Lake, Colorado. Those four teams, if it ended right now, would be separate groups, along with Cruz Azul and Toluca from this year's Apertura. And just for sake of last year's Clausura, it'd be Club America and Monterrey. So those 12 teams are all in separate groups. They each get to pick, the Liga MX teams get to pick their hub. The MLS teams get to play in their home stadium. You then build the rest of the groups around them. And I don't know, again, I don't know how it balances out in terms of teams from each league or whatever, but all those teams for the group stage stay there. So there's no traveling from Orlando to Montreal to LA and then back to Mexico. You're just there for the week. You're limiting your travel to one trip, and there you go. Every day leading up to this involves the game from four of the groups because MLS has no problem playing all of its games on the same time. Leagues Cup can do the same. So at 7 p.m., you have a game from the first four groups. So East 1, East 2, West 1, and West 2, they all kick off. At 10 p.m., the other two teams from that same group kick off their game. The next day, it goes to East 3, East 4, West 3, West 4. And then the next day, it's East 5, East 6, West 5, West 6. So every 3 days, you're playing a game. The group stage is over in 9 days. I think it took 12 or 13 days to finish this year. So you're cutting down on the group stage already. And there are no weird setups where Red Bull were already knocked out before some teams even kicked off for the first time. Like it's very ordered, very organized. From there, the top two teams in each group go to the knockout bracket, 24 teams in total instead of 32. The best record from the top eight go directly into the round of 16, and then the bottom 16 do they're in the first round, technically. That's the same number of game days with a few less games. And if you cut down the time again from 4 days in between each one to three, because of travel, maybe you limit the travel a little bit, you can trim the tournament's length down a week from this year's competition. I agree with you. I think one month was just too long to take a break. I mean, especially for the teams that are not getting out of the group. I mean, we sat around for 3 weeks. Both of our teams saw that, right? We sat around for weeks before they kicked off again. It is just a little bit too long, and I think they need to find a way to make it shorter. And I think that's one way to do it is by just keeping things closer because they gave a lot of time in between so that everybody can travel. If you get rid of the travel part of it and reward what you've done in your league, now you don't have to travel. Now you're good.
That was hard to follow. I
Yeah, I
can't really
know.
follow it because
On
and
the
I'm
video,
not yeah,
I'm gonna see if I can do like designs.
I'm not sure I follow because I guess like I got lost after you talked about the groups because you talked about either 12 groups of four or eight groups of six.
Forget
But
the eight groups of six. Forget the eight groups of six.
okay,
That's just another way to break it down.
even if we take 12 groups of four, you're already creating six extra games you have to play in the group stage by making it 12 groups of four. Because right now you play 15 groups, you play each team in your group once, so you play 30 games. And then if you go 12 groups of four, you're now playing 36 group stage games as opposed to 30. I think you're cutting it down because you've condensed the timing, but I feel like we can cut it down even more if we just figure out some other solution to how we kind of organize it. And I have to think about it a little bit more, but maybe you could do some kind of, rather than having group stages, because I feel like group stages is what's really making it super long, versus we can find some way to give teams maybe buys based on their league performance, and then just do solo knockouts like pretty much any other cup competition does, as
Well,
opposed to like the Champions League.
I won't spoil my third idea, but you're transitioning really well. But what I'll say, we're
Well, you
going to
should
pause
just
on the
talk about it then
transition.
if it's
We're going to
transition.
pause on the transition.
Oh,
I'm going to
but
say
then it's not a
the point.
transition.
I'm going to say the point about the group games is that because of the hub privileges and everybody playing in the same area, you're limiting the amount of time it takes. Yes, you're playing more games, but each game had 5 or 6 days in between because teams had to travel all over the country and then prep and then get a training day in. If you give them, this is your, think MLS is back, right? This is where you're going to play. And it's not for a month where you're going to be missing out on seeing your family and stuff, but you've got a week and a half where you're going to stay in this area and you're going to train and you're going to play and then you'll be either done and go home or you'll move on. But at the end of the day, you're going to go home and then you got 4 days in between or whatever. It trims down on the time, not necessarily the number of games. And that's the
Yeah,
number of games
but what
also
if you
decreases
just
as you go
what
forward.
if you just combine the two things? We just keep it in a hub. I think similar to what US Open Cup does, but like combining your idea into it of like I guess almost like the NCAA tournament. It's like you're gonna play all your game
Yeah,
like
yeah.
this part of the bracket is gonna play your games in this area, like in this stadium.
Hmm.
And eventually it will dwindle down into a small enough region where you can kind of like be like, all right, these last four, the two semifinals and the final is going to be in this location, this
Right. No, and
random
that's
site or
that's
whatever.
that's exactly where I was going with it, but I was also trying to get rid of the randomness of just a random three-team group. Right. I was trying to add a little bit more balance to it. And, this is circa World Cup style, right? Four teams in a group, everybody plays 3 games, and then best of the best moves on. I was trying to get rid of this. Okay, you're going to play 2 games, one against each team, and it's just I mean, it's a crapshoot, really, where I think 4 games or 3 games against 3 different opponents gives you a little bit more balance of who probably should go through. I was trying to get away from the 3 team group. That's all it was. And that's why I brought up the 8 groups of 6 too. Now, that's also a whole nother nightmare, but that could go top 2 from each one of those groups moves on, and then right into your knockout bracket from round of 16 instead of having that extra round there. But I think that puts too much emphasis on the group stage and it gets a little bit messy from there. So I
I,
see what you're
I,
saying, but
well, I will set you up for your transition again so we could try it again, but I don't. I think we should just stray like if you're gonna have this many teams, just stray away from the group stage at this point because we already kind of went through the whole like pausing the season thing for a World Cup size tournament. I don't think that was well received based on, you know, pausing in the middle of the season for this like 2 month long break so you can get this tournament in. I don't think that's the way to go about it. So I think I mean it's a cup at the end of the day. Like if you look at European cups, they're I mean, I don't have all the data in front of me. I'm sure there's some that do it differently, but
not
they're
prepared. Wow.
they're just knockout style tournaments. It's not like we have group stages in the
Hmm.
FA Cup or the Leagues Cup or the DFB Pokal. Like you just knockouts because it's just a cup. You know, it's not the regular season. It's not the Champions League. Like just have it be knockouts. You don't have to have group stages, and it doesn't always have to be like, oh, the best teams out of the best teams must move on. Like that's kind of the fun of the cup is it's like, all right, this is a chance that if you are struggling in the league, all of a sudden you can start doing some magic here in this cup. And it's not that League's Cup in the current format doesn't have that with the group stages. Obviously, we've seen that already, But I think having just pure knockouts not only makes it go faster, so you have less of a pause if you're going to keep this break in the season, but kind of adds more element of randomness, kind of fun that I think people would more so look for in a cup competition.
Yeah. And that is where my last idea goes from, unless you want to throw one more in there. I know you've got tons of them because this is all you
I,
think about, I'm sure.
I'm gonna keep some of them in the bank for when we have part two of this episode.
Yeah, something like that. Um, no, my third idea, and I've kind of hinted at it before, is make this a secondary tournament and go back to the 2019 format, but bigger. And it's a bit of a drawn out one, so again, you're gonna have to let me get into it. But I think you and I both, I mean, I definitely have the feeling, and I know a lot of people share it, that the MLS Liga MX rivalry is being watered down a bit. You've got Champions Cup, Leagues Cup, Campeones Cup, and USA Mexico plays each other like 7 times a year. Like it's just not what it used to be, right? Add in the fact that this is a tournament that's meant to qualify for Champions Cup. Let's use this as something where we're not seeing the teams that play in Champions Cup play again. So what I mean by that is let this be the competition played by the middle of the pack teams. I've thought this out a little bit. Here's how it could work, but it takes a lot of change, which is why this is like the least likely of all my ideas to happen. First, it means that you need to change the way that Champions Cup spots are earned through the regular season. To me, it would be top 2 to 3 in each conference, depending on Supporter Shield, US Open Cup, MLS Cup. I used 2021 as an example because it was a really good balance where there was the Mickey Mouse COVID Cup Fraud Cup for New York City. The Revs won the Shield, and Atlanta was babied and gifted a Champions Cup for like the 15th year in a row because they canceled the U.S. Open Cup and they finished in fifth, completely undeserved. But we move. In this scenario, it would have been New York City in first, Atlanta in fifth, New York City in fourth from the East. Colorado, Seattle, SKC, 1, 2, and 3 would have been from the West. From this point, those 6 teams do not play in Leagues Cup. The clubs that play in this Leagues Cup can either be all 24 left, or what I would prefer would be the remaining playoff teams from the year before. So for 2021, because there were, it was a shortened playoff season, it would have been Philly, Nashville, Orlando, Red Bull, Portland, Minnesota, Vancouver, RSL. Those would have been the 8 teams in this Leagues Cup tournament. This year, if we were to follow the same scenario, it would be a bit bigger because they expanded the playoffs. It would include the 12 teams, so the 6 teams from each conference that are not in that list. Those 12 teams, and I'll use 12 from this point on, would compete in a pure knockout bracket against the 12 teams from Liga MX. And I'm not really sure how this would work because I don't know Liga MX that well, but I would assume it would mean the winners and the runners up of the Apertura and the Clausura plus the next 2 highest finishers from the table in the combined table. Those 4 would get the automatic bid to the Champions Cup. Everybody else plays in Leagues Cup. Are you following? Does that make sense?
You lost me ages ago.
Oh my God, you don't know anything.
What do you mean?
So
You couldn't have made
pull
that
up,
sound more confusing.
pull up, pull up
I
the.
agree with you. I need a graphic in front of me.
You do. So I'll send it to you when we're done because it's a lot easier to watch. So if you're listening to this and you're confused and you're not drawing it on a piece of paper, head over to YouTube. It'll have a little graphic that'll walk you through it. From
Here's what
here,
that. Oh, sorry, you're not
go
done.
ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh
No,
no,
no, no, go ahead.
what do you mean I'm not done. Of course I'm not done. I've got this whole thing planned out. I'm sending this
Man,
whole
you really
spreadsheet to
are an
Daddy Don.
MLS shill because you made this
Daddy
as
Don is getting the
complicated.
spreadsheet.
He has brainwashed you because you've made this as complicated as possible, which is the
It's
absolute
actually
MLS
not.
way.
It's not that
It
complicated.
sounds like it.
Well,
We're
well
still
the reason
talking
it's not
about it. We're like
the re
multiple minutes in.
escucha. The reason it's not complicated is because really the way that it's already done to decide Champions Cup spots, right? It's the top 2 or 3 finishers, and then U.S. Open Cup, MLS Cup, Supporter Shield. So if you're winning the double, for example, like LAFC last year, it just moves down a spot or moves down a spot, right? So it's not that confusing if you consider it that way. But those 12 teams compete in a pure knockout bracket against the 12 teams from Liga MX. And then it's the same way as the current competition. You go in, winner, runner up, and third place can qualify. You can drop it to one spot if you really want to. I really don't care how, but with the expanded Champions Cup, it's probably going to stay at three qualifiers, right? But the biggest thing for me is that this shortens the tournament to maybe a week and a half at most, right? You've got, so if it was 12 versus 12 in a knockout style format, it is a play-in round, final, semifinal, quarter, and then it's five games after that, or 5 game week. So you're really playing 6 game weeks at the longest, and the longest it takes 2 weeks. But I think you could probably push it to a week and a half. And to me, that's ideal, right? Because as we mentioned before, stopping it for that long kills a lot of momentum, not only in the regular season, but for those teams that don't make it all the way to the final, you're just kind of hanging around. Not enough fans are around and are diehards where they're going to watch every MLS game that's on, or every Liga MX or Liga MX MLS. That's just not the thing that they're doing, right? Especially in a cup competition, they might not understand. So I think this is really nice because not only does it cut down on schedule congestion, but it also, I think, allows the opening for the return to the US Open Cup in full. I think it's super, super low that this possibly takes place because one, it takes away the number of games that are being played, which means less money. It decreases the number of game Apple TV can show, therefore lessens their chance of gaining subscribers. And three, it removes a lot of the big teams from the tournament altogether, which is the main driving force for Liga MX fan attendance. So, pure sporting aspect, I think this makes the most sense. It's closer to what the original concept was back in 2019. And I think it makes the most sense to do because you're not kind of hoarding those Champions Cup spots again. Like Columbus had the chance to do a treble, right? And then now it makes everything all nasty on trying to figure out how this stuff works. This gives a qualification spot to those teams that are maybe close but not close enough. Whether you think that's good or bad, I don't know. But I think it would make the most sense to do. They can back this version of the tournament with this level of advertising it had the last few years and really push it as a premier qualifying tournament for the Champions Cup. I think that's the problem, is that the way that you hit this is saying, bang, here you go. This is the premier and easiest way outside of the US Open Cup, which again, whole other option that we've talked about before, which could get you to a Champions Cup and get you 4 games away from playing Real Madrid, which could then raise the prestige of the tournament and people would go for it a little bit more, whatever it may be. But I think this is the best way to do it from a sporting aspect, which means it is the least likely that it's actually going to happen because it doesn't make enough money.
I feel a little bad saying this because you went on for so long about you clearly put a lot of thought into this, but I think this was your worst idea of the episode. If I'm gonna be completely honest with you here.
No, it's a great idea. You're just not smart enough to understand.
So for
What do you
one,
not like about it?
I'll get into it. So for one, as a neutral, and I think for a lot of other people too, and you touched upon this. I know you mentioned this as one of the negatives of this, so I'm not gonna knock you too much for it, but I want to watch the big teams play at this tournament. I want to see
Sure.
LAFC, Giroux, and like Cucho and Columbus play in this tournament. What I don't want to watch is more San Jose. That's what I don't want to watch, if I'm being honest. I want to
San
watch.
Jose's not in the playoffs.
Okay, so then we've limited. Yeah, so it doesn't matter. I don't. So I don't want to watch. Let me think of a good example.
Atlanta? Yeah,
Uh,
me either.
Honestly, yeah, I wouldn't want to watch current state Atlanta right now. That's not what I want to see in this competition. I'd much rather watch Columbus. That was one thing, but you touched upon that, so I don't want to harp on that one too much. I
Right.
personally
That's the
think
reason it's not going to happen.
I personally think this kills US Open Cup even more than Leagues Cup already is, because if I'm a team competing in both the US Open Cup and the Leagues Cup, and I can't compete in the Leagues Cup because I potentially could win the Open Cup, I'm not even going to try in the Open Cup in that case because there's way more money in it in the Leagues Cup. So then I'm just going to sack US Open Cup completely, because if I win US Open Cup, I can't compete in Leagues Cup now. So I'd say forget it. Let's just send out whatever. Like if I have to play in this, I'm sending out the youth team, because if I'm going to have a shot at winning something, I want to go win Leagues Cup because I can make a million versus making like a couple bucks.
So this is in the ideal world that we are allowing teams to pick and choose which ones they care about most, right? And we've talked about that with the whole US Open Cup thing, is that in the ideal world, we're back in a place where Don Garber says everybody's in. You get to choose whether you use a reserve team, you get to use a U21 team, whatever it may be. You get to pick which path you want to go. So if you get into Leagues Cup, you're like, okay, my bracket's going to take me through Tigres, Chivas, Atlas, Pumas, Puebla, and Club America, and maybe Pachuca Leon, right? Some combination of those. Okay, I'm probably not getting through Leagues Cup there, right? Especially if I'm not a team that is in the top of MLS already. What it does mean is that now I can look at US Open Cup and say, there's not as much money in there, but I have to go through a USL one side, two USL championship sides, and maybe an MLS side, and I get to play in the Champions League. I'm going to put more effort towards there. I think that in the world where you are able to pick and choose this format that is most definitely not going to happen, but it's just a hypothetical. This format allows you a better chance to determine which is which because and again now you talk about redistributing a little bit of money, but if you look at it this way, if we're doing a straight knockout game and you lose in the first round, now you still have a different path to get through in US Open Cup, right? And if you choose to go all out in Leagues Cup and you don't get through, okay, well now I still can do a rotation game in US Open Cup. I can put all my eggs in US Open Cup, and you have to play into what you're doing in the league as well. It makes you think a little bit more about how to go about things and be instead of being told you're going to use US Open Cup as a reserve tournament and you are going to because I mean again we talked about Leagues Cup before where Leagues Cup was used by some teams and apparently according to Dome Torrent if he survives the rest of the season is good next year is going to be used as a reserve tournament for his team. Not everybody plays their best 11. I know there's money on the line, but that doesn't mean that they're playing their best 11 because they're trying to work out other things as well, get healthy and what have you. I think just having more options without having the schedule congestion that we've talked about for the last, hour or so here today is really good. It's really important. That's why I think this is a decent format. And again, I need to say this again. I know it's never going to happen because they were there already. And instead of expanding it to this point, like we've talked about, they went and blew it all the way up to the highest level. I think I like the 2019 version better if it was marketed better. I didn't even know it was happening until it was over. But I did enjoy the concept. The 2019, if you seriously go on Wikipedia and look at the way the 2019 thing was set up, it just made so much more sense because it should be used as a qualifying tournament, not its own standalone thing that you also qualify for. You know what I mean? Like to me, this is a home run for teams that just want that should be looked at as you can qualify for a tournament through this. I don't know if it necessarily needs to be blown up as the greatest thing since sliced bread. That makes sense?
I don't think it needs to be blown up as the greatest thing since sliced bread either. But I mean, I don't think I wouldn't be putting all my eggs in the basket of I need to win Leagues Cup so I can qualify for the Champions League.
Well, and
I
that's
think,
your choice, right? That's your choice.
but the problem is, and so I wanted to go back to your discussion on you can choose based on like how the layout is looking on whether or not you're going to try for US Open Cup or Leagues Cup. The problem is you have to play in this year you play 3 rounds of US Open Cup before the Leagues Cup even starts. So when US Open Cup is start like you're going to play 3 games before you have any idea who you're even going to play against in the Leagues Cup. So it's like how am I supposed to properly assess both when I have to play multiple rounds in the US Open Cup before I can even find out who I'm going to be playing in the Leagues Cup. So I just don't think you could properly decide which tournament you want to put your eggs in because they're not happening simultaneously. So you're not going to
Well, that
know who
that's
you're going to
exact
come
that's
up
exactly
against in
my
Leagues Cup.
that's exactly my point. You go through US Open Cup if you make it down to a point where now you know what the group stages are going to look like. No, I'm sorry, not the group stage. The knockout stages are going to look like, and I know they get reseeded every once in a while. But if you look at it, you go, okay, well, there's two more USL one teams, a bunch of championship teams, but on our side of the bracket, they're relatively low. and we got a couple of lower level MLS sides. Okay, now I know that that's a pretty likely scenario for us if we get it right. Versus going into Leagues Cup, like, okay, I've got three U.S. Open Cup games done. I know what my team can do. I now look at the draw, and as I mentioned, we have to win a play-in game against Guadalajara, and then travel to Tigres, and then if we get by Tigres, we've got Puebla or we got Pachuca who just won the Champions Cup. Like, okay, maybe that's not going to be my strongest thing. Maybe here I can experiment a little bit and figure out what works so that when we get back to the MLS season or the US Open Cup or whatever, now we've got a path forward and say, okay, I can trust this guy here, there, and anywhere. Or I can't trust this guy here, there, and anywhere. But I think just having the option to be able to pick and choose is important. And this goes all the way back to our conversation of teams should still be in the US Open Cup and be able to pick and choose if they care about it or not. It's the same idea in Leagues Cup because I mean, again, I watched Leagues Cup where we started a 16-year-old and our first four subs off the bench were all teenagers from our academy. Like it's quite clear we didn't, value it as highly as we could have. And again, we were injured and stuff, but we weren't the only team to do that. And there were other teams that went out and put starting 11s out every single game, right? And that's just my whole thing is there. But the big overarching preface of this is that I don't need to see the teams that are going to play in Champions Cup continue to play and water down this tournament. And I also don't need to see, Querétaro versus San Jose or New England or Nashville. Like, I don't necessarily need to see those. The only reason that those lower level Liga MX teams are involved here is because they don't have as many teams as us. That's the only, otherwise, I would cut off the bottom four or five here too, but it just makes the numbers work. I think this should be almost like you've got your qualifiers for Champions Cup, and then there are two more spots on the line that you can earn from the middle of the pack. That's kind of the way I see it.
I feel like it's putting a lot of emphasis on Champions League, and I don't think it's quite fair to the teams that are being successful to be like, sorry, you can't compete in this for this huge prize pool because you're too good, and because all of this is based on Champions League. Whereas, like we talked about earlier in the episode, if they just got rid of the Champions League spots, we'd still watch it anyway. So I don't
Correct.
think
And
Champions League spots should be a
if
decider.
you came to me with that argument 30 minutes ago, like everything makes sense. Like your stance is fine. Because you're right. The only thing that makes this not work is you're telling teams, "Hey, we're going to put $5 million on the line, but you can't play." And that's totally
Because
fair
you're too good.
because you're too good. Right.
It's
And that is
different
a
if you're like,
totally
oh, you didn't qualify for it because you're too bad.
right.
Like
Right.
you're being like, oh, you're too good, you can't go for this prize pool.
Totally fair. And that I'm okay with you dissenting against.
I was gonna say, I feel like if anything, you should flip it and be like, if you miss the playoffs, you're not in this competition. Like if you finish at the bottom of the table, you don't get to qualify for this competition. At least
I'm
incentivize,
cool with that too.
if we're not gonna have Perel, right? And you're a team that's been knocked out for weeks, like a la Colorado or Toronto last season, give them like at least a little motivation to at least still move up a little bit in the table so that maybe you can qualify for this competition and win the prize pool as opposed to just being like, all right, well, we're 5 weeks out. We've been eliminated. Like, who cares? We're just gonna throw out whoever on the field at this point.
Well, if they were already knocked out, then there's no chance in that scenario that they make the cup, do they? Or the Leagues Cup, do they?
Well, I'm not saying that like you should only have teams that make the playoffs make it, but maybe the cutoff is just a little bit different. I'd have to look into the logistics of it more, in terms of like balancing it out between Liga MX teams and MLS teams. But
And
maybe
that
it's
and that was
like the
where
top 10 in each conference makes it.
well that was where my cutoff went to, right? Where I cut it off at the playoff teams because the numbers made sense and it balanced with Liga MX well, and it also did, it gave the team something else to play for, right? Again, as you mentioned, there is no pro rel, and not saying that we need it or whatever, like everybody else does, but that's a really good incentive to say, man, not only are you missing out on the playoffs where you can earn yourself a Champions Cup spot that way, but now you're missing out on the opportunity to compete for even more money. Then that ties into the whole, oh, are we going to split up and lose parity and blah, 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 and a whole other conversation. But make it worth something. I'm cool with it. I'm cool with it. Now,
I
I
think
guess
the
the only thing we've missed then is do we include the teams that are already in CCC
we do.
and yeah, and that's something again in this hypothetical world where we know this this may happen versus the real world where we know this is never happening. Um, that's an argument we can have. But yeah,
I think the
yeah,
general consensus after all of that is we need some kind of change to the scheduling because it is too long of a hiatus.
yes, I think that is the perfect way to summarize that is at some point we can't take a month off for this thing because you are killing the momentum of the season. You are losing interest from the casuals who are not watching your team for 3 weeks and then are like, oh, wait, the league's back 4 weeks after it started up. And then not only that, you are taking a lot of teams and using this idea of like, oh, we can't play in the U.S. Open Cup because, schedule congestion. And then, half of them are only playing 2 games and then not touching a ball for 3 weeks. It just doesn't line up. And there are different ways to go about it. I think my ideas are great. I think your ideas didn't exist. Did you not? Did you even have an idea today?
My idea was I mean you just completely glossed over it, but my idea was to try to like format it in a way where you could play it mid-week and keep the season going as opposed to pausing it. Obviously, you'd have to change
Uh,
the format of it. I don't think you could do group stages and knockouts. It's you'd be playing midweek games all year long, and that would be too much, I think.
you would
But
never have a break, would you?
yeah, exactly. But that's why I say you got to just change the format of it. And I think I don't have the logistics of it figured out right now, but I think you would try to format it some way so that it's knockouts, just direct knockouts. And I think it would be faster and combine it with, I really like your idea of having like the hub and just kind of like putting groups into regions and just playing it all in one location. I think you can move it along much faster that way.
This is why you need to move down to Carolina because what we could do then is next time we would hang out in person, we would sit down and actually write this out like pen and paper and plan it out, send it to Daddy Don, get his approval, make a nice little bit of coin off the top of the planning budget, and then retire and then just podcast for the rest of our lives. But you decided to live in Brooklyn, so whatever.
You're the one that left, sir.
You left first. Did I? No, I might have left first. Did I go to Kentucky before you went to Brooklyn? I couldn't. I don't know.
I think so, because I think I was still in Bing.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. You were. I remember that. We were trying. That was a fun time trying to get you to work through your Wi-Fi issues.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
that was a lot of fun. Yeah, but listen, that's all we got. I think, unless Connor wants to throw one more in there. Now,
No,
listen.
I'll store it for other days. I'll store it for
uh,
when we collab and do it in person.
Yeah. So hopefully you understood where we're going with this. Maybe the visual aids helped if you're watching on YouTube. If not, be sure to share your first of all, be sure to share your ideas with us, period. We love interacting with you guys. But if it didn't make sense to you in the audio, send us a message using the new feature at the top of the audio episode link. It should say something like if you have an idea or comment or question, send us a text, a little link. You go in there and send it our way. Or you can shoot us an email. When's the last time we plugged the email on this one? The dppod@gmail.com. Let's get back into
I
some
forgot we even had an email.
yeah, let's go back to some emails from the fans. Shoot us some messages and maybe we get enough. We read them out on the pod one day. But yeah, listen, I've been Andrew. That's Connor over there. We really appreciate you guys listening. Make sure you follow us wherever you get your podcasts. So you know the next time we go live. Follow us on all forms of social media. That's Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. And yeah, listen, we'll catch you on the next one. We got a very fun MLS history coming up. So be sure to subscribe to listen to that one. And we'll see you next time on the next episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. See ya.